Welcome to the Thursday broadcast of Wisdom in the Word. We're glad that you're joining us today. We appreciate you taking time out of your Thursday afternoon to spend some time with us, studying the Bible and answering your questions. Today, we're going to be answering a couple of questions from the Scriptures, and some of them are more practical, others of them are more theological, but we love them all. And so if you have questions, we want to encourage you to submit them to us. Make sure that you can write them down, email us, make sure to get them to us in some way. Be honest, as I'm looking out over my questions, I got about 6 questions left. Okay, so that's where we're at. About 6 questions that will get us through to the end. And so if you have some, please feel free to send them to us. We'd be glad to answer them for you. Again, let me remind all of our men coming up on Saturday at 10 o'clock is our Mighty Men Fish Fry and Cornhole Tournament. We hope that you'll join us for that event. We're looking forward to spending some time with you, fellowship, time in the Word, just a great day, great morning. We're not going to, again, hold you hostage. We want you to come, have a good time. We've got some good fish that we're going to fry up for you, and we're looking forward to a great time. I'm going to give everybody a chance just to get in place today, as kind of as a lead in here. Just give everybody a second, and then we'll start the audio part of this. Make sure you like and comment. Let me know that you're down there. Share this out with somebody else. We want to share this on multiple venues so that we can get this Bible study out to other people who might be interested as well, okay? So help us out there. We'll get this thing started here in just a second. Welcome to the Thursday broadcast of Wisdom in the Word. This is Thoughtful Thursday, where we will be answering questions from our listeners. And we're so grateful for those questions that someone would take the time and write them in, something that they're genuinely curious about. Today we're going to answer 2 questions, and both of the questions revolve around the same subject. We're going to talk a little bit today about tithing, about stewardship, and about the importance of giving. Let's talk about that a little bit today. Let me read our first question. Money and possessions are subjects in many chapters of the Bible. How these things are handled is very important to the Lord. In the Old Testament, the tithe, the tenth, is used as a guideline for giving to God. Many New Testament born-again believers use 10% as a starting point for giving to the Lord. Some may even give out of fear if they don't use or give 10%. How can New Testament believers decide on how much to give to the Lord as offerings, since the word tithe is not used in the New Testament? Well, let me make a little bit of a correction here. The word tithe is used in the New Testament. In fact, it's used a few times throughout the Gospels. Jesus uses it in a negative way, in the sense that he tells the Pharisees they ought to tithe, but they ought not to ignore the weightier matters of the law. So tithing is found in the Gospels. It's also found in the book of Hebrews. If you've been studying with us on the book of Hebrews, you'll find a tithe or a tenth is used to describe what Abraham did in Genesis 14 in giving an offering to the king of Salem, a man by the name of Melchizedek. Now, so it is mentioned in the New Testament, but it is not mentioned in the sense of, hey, this is what you ought to be doing. This is the way you ought to be living. This is the way you ought to be giving. And so we are correct in that particular assumption. So the question really is, how can New Testament believers decide on how much to give to the Lord as offerings? And so this kind of goes back, and to kind of decide this, we have to go back a little bit and say, okay, well, what was their understanding in New Testament times? Remember, in the New Testament times, the children of Israel, even though they were under Roman occupation, they gave their tithes. They were still paying their tithes. They had taxes that they had to pay to Rome, and they were also paying their tithes in order to be able to support the religious infrastructure of the nation of Israel. In fact, that was how the priests, the Levites, made a living. It's how they were supported in being able to give it. In fact, if you go back into the Old Testament, you'll find that most scholars believe there were 3 tithes that were required of the people in the Old Testament, which put the giving somewhere, scholars estimate somewhere around 23% of what came in. And it wasn't always monetary. They didn't just give money. Today, our transaction is really in money. Their transactions back then were in more of a barter and trade system, where they did have money, but they would give of the fruit of what they had. They would give of the first of their flock, or they would give of the first of what they had. Now, where this came from, again, the Levitical law, the law at Sinai, actually provided these tithes, and they were commanded to do it. Now, we got to remember how things were structured in the Old Testament. Remember, in the Old Testament, the structure of the Old Testament was that the Jews lived under a theocracy. That is, God ruled them. And as God ruled them, the religious part of their nation was important. It wasn't just government that was important. It wasn't just justice that was important, but also religion and faith were important to the Jewish people. And so when they gave their tithes served both as an expression of worship to God, because they were doing it out of obedience, and it also served as almost like a tax and taxation in order to be able to support the religious work that was being done within the nation of Israel. And so it is significant to us to acknowledge the fact that we're living in a different time. We do not, as believers today, live under a theocracy. We don't live under a theocratic government. We pay our taxes separate from what we give to be able to honor God. And of course, we pay our taxes. The New Testament does teach us to pay tribute or tax to whom it is due. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that we are supposed to, give God what's his and give Caesar what's his, give the government what's theirs as well. So both of those things need to be done simultaneously. Now, when you go back into the Old Testament, one of the things that you find principled, a principle that was given to us, is the fact that God is to be honored with the first fruits. Honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. The Bible says, shall thy presses be filled with wine, So when we look at the Bible, there's a blessing that's promised for honoring God with the first fruits of what we have. So it's significant that the Bible tells us to set aside the first. I think that's the first guiding principle for every believer, and I don't think that's changed. God is to be honored with the first. So when we give, I give to God. I try to give to God, even though when I receive my check, my taxes are taken out. I try and make sure that God is honored first. I want to acknowledge him first with my gifts. Now, the next big question is, how do I determine what to be able to give? Well, again, when you look at the New Testament, you don't see the concept of a tithe given, but also remember, most of the New Testament was written with Jewish people, the majority of them, who were still giving God. They were still honoring God with their tithes, and so they were still giving. Some of the people were giving tithes in the nation of Israel. Others of them were paying taxes to Rome. So to give anything beyond that, remember, they were still under the Judaistic system. To give anything beyond that was a struggle for them. It was a real struggle for them to be able to give anything monetarily beyond the taxation that they were given in Rome and beyond the tithes that they had to pay or they felt compelled to pay in their Judaistic religion. Whether or not the apostles abandoned the concept of tithing is not told to us in the New Testament. Whether they abandoned that to the Judaistic type of giving and whether they transferred that and then started to give to their churches in that way, we do not know. We are not told that in the New Testament. So the way that we kind of work through it is we go back and we look at historically, we understand biblically that we have Abraham giving a tenth, a tithe, to Melchizedek before there was a law. We find other passages where tithe was given before the law was established. So we'd say that the law was established in principle before it was ever established as a regular practice, right? So we could say that. Not that they gave it regularly, but that concept did exist and they were aware of it, and giving a tenth or a tithe was something that they did before the law. So we could say that the principle of tithing was established before we had the law. So the question is, should it continue after the law? When you go back and you start reading about the apostolic and post-apostolic periods, Christian opinions on tithing differed in the early church between those who sought distinct separation from the perceived legalism inherent in Judaism and those who saw ongoing parallels between Jewish and Christian priesthood. That is, some would say, well, there's no reason for us to stop doing what we ought to be doing. And others would say, well, to prescribe it and say you have to do it is legalism. And so there was even a debate early on. Early documents such as the Didache may promote tithing, but they refer to the practice implicitly. Early church fathers such as Irenaeus took literally Jesus' command to give everything to the good of the church, not just a tenth. Some people will say, I know some people who practice and have practiced reverse tithing. They give God 90% and they keep 10. Okay? Now, again, that's not a prescription for everybody. Not everybody can survive on that. Okay? But some people feel led of the Lord to be able to do that. Chrysostom assumed that the practice of tithing was of ongoing significance for the church, bemoaning those who would give little to nothing and certainly not a tenth. And so if you go back and read some of the writings of Chrysostom, he assumed that the tithing was ongoing. Jerome and Augustine conceded that if Christians are unwilling to eschew physical goods, they should at least tithe. And so it has been held historically since the 2nd century and forward, even after the apostles, there was some aspect of continuation of the tithe, whether it was tithe in specific practice or whether it was a recommendation that giving, Jesus would tell us it is more blessed to give than receive. So some of what we have by going back and looking at the historical nature of it. Now today, in our day, opinions on whether Christians should practice tithing are divided and nuanced. When you look at people and what they say, some people say, well, the Old Testament prescription for tithing isn't meant to be taken literally, since it ought to be shaped, since New Testament evidence is incidental. That is, it's not mentioned. I had somebody who said, we just can't join the church because you believe in tithing. And I said, is this a problem? I mean, that we believe in giving? Well, the issue was they didn't want to have to give a tenth. Well, that's Old Testament. I've had actually two families that have been upset about the way that we personally have approached the matter of the tithe. But I've never approached the matter of the tithe in a legalistic, cyanide kind of way that, if you don't do it, this whole curse thing that's upon you. But I do believe that it was established in principle way before the law was given, and that as principle, it's a good starting place for a believer. Some people, again, believe today that the Christian attitude towards giving ought to be shaped by the Old Testament. And again, I don't believe that Jesus abolished and got rid of the law. I think there were certain things in the law that were good. I don't believe the law was evil and wicked. Again, am I going to impose everything restrictively like the law did? No, we're freed by the saving grace of God. We're under law, under grace, not under law. But at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that much of what we do, even our worship today, is taken from the synagogue worship that was taken during the gospel ministry, how we worship in churches today. So I would say that our giving ought to be shaped by the Old Testament, but defined by Jesus' prescriptions and Paul's exhortations in the New Testament. In fact, there may not be much on tithing, but there sure is a whole lot about giving. In Acts chapter number 4, it talks about people that sold their goods and laid it at the apostles' and elders' feet, so it might be distributed to those that had need. You can see mentions, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16, talks about receiving an offering and keeping it. And when he comes, he's going to be able to receive it. 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 talk about the grace of giving. Jesus would tell us in Luke that we should give, and that if we give, that God will give to us, pressed down, shaken together, men will give into our bosom. And so there are so many principles of stewardship in the New Testament. Jesus would say it's more blessed to give than to be able to receive. We have warnings in the Bible about money and about its acquisition and about what it can do to us if we have it and it begins to rule us and begins to be our point of worship. So we can say this for sure. Tithing is an Old Testament concept. The tithe was a requirement of the law in which the Israelites were to give 10% of their crops that they grew, the livestock they raised, to the tabernacle or the temple. The Old Testament law required multiple tithes. It wasn't just one tithe. There were multiple. One was for the Levites. One was for the use of the temple and the feasts. One was for the poor. That would have pushed, again, some people believe up to about 23.3%, some scholars say. Some understand the Old Testament tithe as a method of taxation to provide for the needs of the priests and Levites in the sacrificial system, which I think is right. So, but again, remember, after the death of Christ, he fulfilled the law. Okay, he fulfilled the law, and in so doing, Christians don't have to submit to a legalistic tithe system. But I would say this, that the New Testament doesn't designate a percentage set aside for this or percentage set aside for that. But some in the Christian church, and some, again, this would be my understanding, have taken the 10% figure from the Old Testament tithe as a recommended minimum for Christians in their giving. I'm not going to say, well, you're under the tithe. But listen, if I'm going to start somewhere, I'm going to start with the 10%. I'm going to start there, and I'm going to move beyond, because I think that God will not require less of us who are under grace than he required of those that were under the law. And I think that with acknowledging God's blessings and having that first principle and that tithe principle, and I still believe blessing is tied to the giving of tithes and offerings in the church. The New Testament talks about the importance and the benefits of giving. We're to give as we are able. Sometimes that means giving more than 10%. There are many people in our country, giving as a whole in our country is down. If you read any of the reports, significant drop in the amount of charitable giving that is being done here in the U.S. But again, it all depends on what your ability is to be able to do. I personally believe in the principle of tithing. I believe you start there as a base for your giving, and then you begin the process of doing more as God blesses you and God enables you to be able to give. I think you ought to do more. I don't think that that's a restriction. And I do it out of love, and I do it out of worship, and I do it out of how God has prospered me. And I'll be honest, my wife and I, we give way more than a tithe, than a 10%. We give a tithe, we give an offering, we give to Faith Promise, we give to, our church has a building fund, we give to that as well. And we do all of that with the thought and understanding that this is a principle, and God has blessed, and God has met our needs, and God has taken care of us over the years, and we've never gone without. But even in the small times, in the lean times, we have never failed, or we've tried to never fail to be able to acknowledge God first with the principle of tithing to be able to give it. So how is a Christian to determine it? Well, I think we can use the whole Bible as a whole Bible plus a little bit of history from Christians to be able to kind of give us a foundation and a base. And then we work off that. We springboard from there into other areas where we might be able to give and be able to worship God. And, I'm a firm believer in the blessing of the tithe, the continued blessing of being able to honor God first. And I think there are plenty of principles in there that we don't have to say, well, because I'm a New Testament Christian, I'm not responsible for that. Okay, so I think that there's much more to consider than just, well, hey, God didn't say anything about it. There's a lot about giving and the importance of giving in the New Testament. Now, let me follow up with question 2, which relates to this, and it will be much shorter, I promise. But someone stated they were tithing by giving money to certain organizations. Our listener writes in and says, someone's tithing and they're not, they're giving to this organization and this organization until they get to their 10% capacity. And this person says, I thought tithing was giving to the local church. Is giving to organizations tithing? I told this person I did not think giving to organizations was tithing. Please clarify. All right, so let me clarify. There's been a debate going on for many years. And it's over the Malachi 3 passage where the Bible says, bring all the tithes into the storehouse. There has been a debate amongst Christians as to whether storehouse tithing is biblical or not. And when they say storehouse tithing, they mean the storehouse is the church. let me say, regardless of whether you believe the Storehouse is the church or not, let me put it to you in these terms. I know of no other institution, no other organization, nothing else that Jesus died to establish and that Christ has ordained as the means by which this world then can be changed than the local New Testament church. If you can find a radio broadcast in the Bible, or you can find a televangelist in the Bible, or you can find a charitable organization in the Bible, or feeding the homeless in the Bible, then I would acknowledge to you that God is going to use all these things to change the world. But I'm going to tell you, Jesus gave his church a commission, and he gave his church a responsibility to preach the gospel. I don't know of any other organization. The Bible says that Jesus died. Ephesians 5 tells us that he died for the church. Jesus said he was giving us his church. And I believe we're talking about a New Testament body of believers gathered together under the banner of the truth of the gospel, saved and baptized and evangelizing the world. That is God's method of changing this world. It is God's ordained, divinely ordained institution for changing this world. Can you give to other organizations? Sure. Have at it. But I'm not giving my offerings. I'm not worshiping God by giving to anything else other than the New Testament church. Because I can't find a biblical mandate that says anything else is going to change the world like the local New Testament church is going to change the world. So if I give, and I do, to other things that I might believe in, I certainly don't take away from my tithe. I certainly don't take away from my missions. I certainly don't take away from my other offerings to be able to give it to those. I give it up and above that, but I'm going to honor God, and I'm going to give to God first in the New Testament church, because according to the Bible, the New Testament church is God's divinely ordained institution for changing this world and seeing people's lives transformed by the gospel. We preach the gospel, and we do all of that within the church. I'm not saying it's not accomplished in other organizations, but that's not the one that God has placed his hand on and placed his hand of blessing on. So when I give, I'm going to give that way. I think, and I would preach this and teach this, all Christians, when they give, when they honor God, when they give in worship, primarily through their tithes and through their offerings, they ought to give in the local New Testament church. I think tithing is a great place to be able to start. I just think it's the minimum. I think we start from there and we move up in our tithing. We never move down. We acknowledge God with the first fruits, and I think we do that through the local New Testament church. All right, so those are your questions today. We've got some others coming up. I've got one on taking care of children, raising children next week, Proverbs 22:6. We're going to have a question on that. I've got one coming up on the Christian flag, one coming up on creeds and having creeds in place. And so we've got those. We hope that you'll submit others to us so that we might be able to tackle these biblically from the scriptures and walk through these studies together. Thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday broadcast. God bless you, and hope you have a great night.